from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
We're very pleased to welcome to our program Idaho State Senator Mary Lou Reed. Senator Reed's opponent was on this program last week for 15 minutes discussing the 1% initiative and his candidacy, and on equal time we're delighted to have Senator Reed with us again today on the first part of today's program. Senator Reed has been in the legislature for 8 years. She has been elected 4 times. She is seeking her 5th term from Legislative District 4. She is also a member of the very powerful Joint Finance Appropriations Committee of the legislature. Senator Reed, welcome back once again.
Oh, thank you, Tony. It's really great to be here. It's like old times.
Yes, years ago you were here a lot. I want to talk about several issues in the short 15 minutes that we have together. You certainly have championed education during your terms in the legislature. You served on the Education Committee for a number of years. And I know one of your pet projects, in addition to appropriation of funds, K through 12 and higher education, is classroom size. I have a 2-part question. First of all, I know you're still championing that idea, and tell us what you think its chances are in the future. And second, what do you see for education in the next 2 or 3 years in Idaho and in this country?
Well, Tony, let me take the second question first, because I think we all, in our concern for whether or not the 1% is going to pass, we have perhaps lost sight of the fact that we have to move forward with education, and maybe dollars aren't everything. I think, though, we have to recognize that we are going to have to look for some reforms, some things that are going to be progressive that perhaps are not all that costly. And I think we have to look to the areas where we can really see that they're applicable to Idaho. I like to start always with the early childhood education. My mother was a kindergarten teacher, and I think I've always been very, very grateful for those early years that I spent 3 years in kindergarten in my home. And so I think that getting kids off to a good start in kindergarten and through the 3rd grade is our first priority, because I think those are the years that are going to mark the stamp. I don't think the chances for classroom size reduction are very good until we're able to put into place some kind of program where the state can help us build the classrooms, help the local school districts build the classrooms that will be necessary if we're going to have smaller classrooms. But I think it's so important that we try and individualize those early years, and I would like to see ungraded classes in kindergarten through 3rd grade. And I don't think that's a very costly reform. Going on up, we're talking a lot about choice. I think parental choice is not an issue in Idaho as much as perhaps providing other choices other than just the regular academic. And I think that the tech prep that is being fostered by North Idaho College is a wonderful way to bring the students from high school into college who may not want to go the academic route. Anyway, I still certainly want to personally put as much of my own energies as I can into promoting education. It's the most important part of our infrastructure, and it's certainly I think it's so important that people learn to read at an early age and that they learn to read for pleasure. And we have to make sure that our education is appropriate to our world today, and so we have to constantly keep reviewing it.
I know that from other comments that you've made that you really believe that early start is crucial, and if that doesn't go well, then education can be a great problem for a person throughout their adult life.
Oh, right. They can really be turned off. They've got some great programs. One's called Reading Recovery that's brought in from, I believe it's New Zealand, and the premise there is that if a child is having a hard time learning to read, you can't let them go any further, because if they can't learn to read, if they don't learn to read, their future is really pretty doomed. So they try and bring in the parents and work with the parents and the student, and they're having wonderful success with individualized treatment, making sure that they don't go any further than, say, the 1st grade until they really can prove that they've learned and that they're feeling excited, responsible, and the parents are a part of it.
In following your career through the legislature, I know that you're interested in the multiplicity of issues. That you certainly do have a lot of different issues that you pursue through the legislature, and you sponsor different kinds of
Well,
legislation.
you have to be kind of a jack of all trades. You know, we have to know a little bit about everything and be content to be a little bit mediocre about everything, too.
Well, there's a lot of concerns out there, aren't there, for citizens? Another one of your
Right.
issues that you've really spent a lot of time on is health care. And we know that there's over 160,000 people in Idaho that are not covered by health insurance, and in this country, over 37 million Americans. There's been a lot of discussion in the national presidential campaign concerning that issue. And then secondly, there was a major discussion of this issue in the Idaho legislature last session, and also even a bill from the Idaho Citizens Network. Where do you see us going, both on the state level and the national level, with health care in the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, I think we're going to have to move rapidly. The people in North Idaho that I'm talking to, going door to door, are most concerned about jobs and the economy, especially in Shoshone County, where the unemployment rate is about 25%. But in the next breath, after talking about the economy, they will bring up their concerns about health care. And there are horror stories out there, and I think that it is clearly the issue that has to be addressed in this decade. From the presidential campaigns, we can tell that if either candidate wins, something should be done on the national level for health care. And I think that's important. That we're already, through Medicare and Medicaid, really involved. The government is involved. I think the issue that we have to ask ourselves is what role does the state government have in dealing with the health care problem? I firmly believe that as we are now, as we're involved with Medicaid, we have 73,000 people in Idaho on Medicaid at this point. So I think we have to move ahead, and I think that the states can perhaps be used as experimental laboratories, and because there are so many ideas, and I think they're going to have to be tested. Hawaii has been going along well with their state program. Oregon has been moving ahead. Massachusetts has too. I would hope that Idaho would be able to serve as a model for some kind of rural health care program. And I believe that we really do need to first address cost containment. That's the most important thing. And we have to, in rural Idaho, make sure that we're using the physician assistants and the nurse practitioners. And I think that in Idaho, perhaps we can use telecommunications as a way of delivering health services. And so I see that everyone is going to have to band together. I think that I prefer myself to look towards a single-payer system, but perhaps that is not the final answer. That would be a way of cutting administrative costs. The most important thing, Tony, I think we always should stress, we can't go anywhere unless the costs are contained. And this double-digit inflation every year is going to be bankrupting to the states and to the federal government, and it's just as big a concern as the national deficit, and perhaps just as out of control.
And so it sounds like that you're suggesting that we'll have to have both the
federal, both the national and the
state.
state, and they'll have to work together. I think it's going to be important too on the local level and on the personal level that the providers and the consumers are working together too. I think every individual has to take responsibility for his or her own well-being. We need to stress wellness, we need to stress prevention, and we need to have more health care delivery at the early age rather than the end of life. And I think everyone should have basic health care available to him no matter what age. Or her.
I'm going to take advantage of the fact you have been in the Idaho Senate for 8 years, and you have worked on many issues and programs, and before that you served on a lot of commissions and boards. You've been active for many years in what we call public policy. As we go down the road in Idaho the next few years, you've been known to be very visionary, and you're looking at issues and problems. Where do you see Idaho going in the next few years? And secondly, what do you think will be some of the outcomes of that path that we take?
Well, it's so hard to look ahead to see where Idaho is going. I think we're moving ahead into perhaps a more progressive mode. But I am now hoping to represent a district that really has been through some very severe economic trauma. So I'm looking at some very basic, very basic things. I mean, everybody really needs to have meaningful work, a good job. They need to have an education. They need to have affordable housing. Lots of people here really do not have a place to live. They need enough food. So those are just really rudimentary things that we in government can only try to assist with, to make available. But I think, on another level, I think that we have a lot of hopes for participatory government. And I think this year's presidential campaign has shown that it is possible for the candidates to reach through past sort of the proscenium arch, so to speak, out to the voters. We have had so many frustrated voters who really are feeling that government is not responsive to them. And I think we have to move government ahead. And I would hope Idaho, which is small, it's large in space, but really has still a smaller population, would be, again, a model for accessibility and responsiveness as a governmental unit to the people that live in Idaho. Then I think, one of the things that we have to be the most concerned about is, why are people coming here? They're coming here because it has a sense. We have a sense of community. We have a sense of place, and we have a lot of absolutely wonderful out of doors that we need to keep as it is. So I would hope that in the future in Idaho we would be able to be in a position to save the Cougar Bays, to save the Hauser Lakes, because the people are able to say what they want and to choose their goals, choose the future, and make sure that they convince their legislators and their leaders that policy should direct them that way.
In the limited time we have left, I want to get on a personal note with you. I'm sure very few of our viewers know that your son, Bruce Reed, who is a Rhodes Scholar, is the deputy campaign manager in charge of policy and a speechwriter for Governor Clinton. And prior to that, he was in a similar capacity with Senator Al Gore when he ran for president in 1988. So he's been with one of those two for many years.
He's been in a very fortunate position for the last few years.
Would you share with us some of the experience that you have as a senator with your son in relation to this time that he's having in his life?
I wish I had more time to spend with him. He's very, very busy. But it is exciting to know that this young man who grew up in Coeur d'Alene and went to Coeur d'Alene schools is actually in a position in which he's able to be close at hand to these policies, future policymakers. And so Bruce Reed from Coeur d'Alene is traveling on the plane with Governor Clinton, or on the bus with Governor Clinton and Senator Gore, and he is helping a little bit here and there with polishing speeches, but he's also doing a lot of the briefing and has been very involved with developing the policies over the last 3 years. But he also, right now, and this is before, this will air after the debates, but he will be briefing the Governor Clinton, whom I hope will be the future president, for the last and final presidential debate. So he's in a very, very exciting position, and he's very tired, but I think feeling very fortunate.
It's a very interesting situation for you, too, because he's so busy in those campaigns, he can't help you with your Senate campaign. So he's
and I wish he could. He's really very good at what he does.
He's off observing at a distance what you're doing.
Yes, and we're wishing him well, too.
Yes. Senator Reed, with that, I have to bring our permanent conclusion. On the second half today, we have to deal with another issue, but we thank you for being with us, and it's been most informative.
Thank you, Tony. A pleasure to be here.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Senator Mary Lou Reed, a state senator in Idaho, and I would like to invite you to be with us on the second half of this program in a few moments, when we're going to discuss an issue on the ballot in Idaho. It's a proposed amendment to the Constitution which would deal with the issue of gambling. And in a moment, after we take a small break, we shall introduce our two guests, one supporting the amendment and one opposing the amendment. We'll be right back. On the second part of our program today, we're going to deal with HJR number 4, which is a proposed amendment to the Idaho Constitution addressing gambling. The purpose of the proposed amendment, according to the voters' pamphlet, is that Section 20, Article 3 of the Constitution of the State of Idaho would be changed to clarify the state policy on gambling. The amendment specifically prohibits casino gambling, and it would limit gambling to authorized areas such as the lottery, the pari-mutuel betting, and bingo and raffle games conducted by qualified charitable organizations for charitable purposes. We have the supporters and the opponents with us today, and I welcome to the program Mr. Stanley Crow, who's an attorney in Boise, and he's also the executive director of the organization Yes, We Won't Know Casinos. Mr. Crow, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
And I'm equally pleased to have on our program Marjorie Matheson, who is the chief executive of the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, and today she also represents the Alliance of Idaho Tribes, and she's here in opposition to the proposed amendment. Mr. Crow, we will start with you and let you tell the viewers why you believe the amendment should be enacted or become part of the Constitution.
The amendment should be enacted because if it is not enacted, gambling and casinos in particular will proliferate throughout our state, as it is already proliferating to a lesser degree, but will more so if the amendment does not pass. And with that proliferation of casinos will come crime that always goes with casinos, will come the associated social costs that accompany casinos, and the impact that those will have on the businesses of our state. They will suck money out of the businesses of our state as they have elsewhere. For example, in the mountain towns of Colorado where there have been casinos, most other businesses have closed because they no longer have customers. They're in the casinos. In Atlantic City, 90% of the retail businesses that were there when casinos went in have closed because they don't have customers anymore. So because of the crime, the social costs, the impact on business, but most important, the proliferation statewide of casinos that will occur if the amendment doesn't pass, we support the amendment.
Ms. Matheson, would you also answer the same question and why that you and others that you represent oppose the amendment?
Well, we believe, and not only the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, which I'm a member of, but also the Alliance of Idaho Tribes, which represents all of the tribes within the state of Idaho, believe that it's an all-out attack on tribal sovereignty. It's a sovereignty issue. The tribes have the treaty with the federal government. We have the right to be recognized as a sovereign governmental entity under the Indian Regulatory Act, which was which is a federal law passed by Congress in 1988. We have the right to establish gaming on the reservations, and through that that law, we are required to negotiate in good faith with the state of Idaho. We believe that caused a restriction on our ability to self-govern, but nonetheless are willing to do so. The governor, the attorney general, and the Idaho state legislature is now trying to circumvent the federal law by surgically removing Indian gaming or gambling out of the Constitution.
I'm going to rotate back and forth so the same one doesn't always answer first or last. Ms. Matheson, I've heard a number of arguments on both sides and concerns, and one of the concerns I've heard from your side of the argument has been that when you look at the proposal that's come out on the pamphlets about this whole area, that there is no mention, I believe, of some of the issues that it relates to the tribes or the effect upon the Native American in our state or the tribes. Would you like to respond to that concern?
Well, the amendment itself doesn't even say Indian gambling, and yet again it's an amendment, or the referendum is specifically aimed at stopping Indian gambling in Idaho. The whole thing started when the tribes requested a negotiation session with the state of Idaho to negotiate a compact in good faith. And as a result, this amendment arose. Indian is never mentioned in the amendment, but yet it's a direct attack on tribal sovereignty. It's misleading, the way that it's written.
And I want to give Mr. Crow equal time to respond to that concern that's come from the opponent.
Well, I have personal knowledge that that's not true, because I was involved myself in meetings discussing a special session before the first request by any tribe for compact negotiations. And the reason for that was that in the regular session of the Idaho legislature back in January, the Amusement Machine Owners Association proposed legalization of video slot machines throughout Idaho. They lost, but they said we're coming back next year. During the regular session, I talked with legislators about having a constitutional amendment to deal with the problem that the amusement machine owners had brought out. There wasn't time to do it in the special session, or in the regular session. After the regular session, I continued in meetings to talk about what to do next year. Then in April, a judge in Boise ruled that the present language in our Constitution makes Idaho's criminal statutes prohibiting gambling unconstitutional as they apply to nonprofit organizations. He held that they had the authority to proceed with games of chance, and he said this may include casinos. Almost to the day, within a very few days of that decision, before and after, requests came from the tribes to negotiate for compacts. But if it had not been for the judge's decision, the governor would not have called the special session, and the legislators wouldn't have supported him if he had. And so I know from personal experience it wasn't an attack on Indians. I'll say also that you probably know there's the proposal in Shoshone County for county option gambling that will be voted on an advisory basis on November 3. So there's a slot machine proposal, there's a county option proposal, there was the decision by the judge in Boise holding our criminal statutes on gambling void as they apply to nonprofits, and then there were the requests by the tribes for compact negotiations. All four, or any one of the four, necessitated a constitutional amendment. And on the sovereignty issue, I'm one who thinks the tribes should be allowed to make decisions for themselves, but I don't believe that they should be allowed to make decisions for the rest of us.
I must interrupt because of time. I need to get to another question. And again, now that I've asked the tribes one of the concerns they have in relation to the amendment, now back to your side of the issue, one of the concerns that has been expressed by the supporters of the amendment, and I know a number of people have come into the state to work with you and share this concern, and that is a lot of information has come out about what gambling does to individuals. Would you like to address that concern and then ask Ms. Matheson to respond to that?
We have not spoken directly to, well, we have spoken of the social costs of what it does to individuals. We're not attempting to say to an individual, if you gamble, you're doing something you shouldn't do. But what we are saying is that when people become compulsive gamblers, or even when they become problem gamblers, they cause social costs. Those have been estimated by experts in the field to be in excess of $50,000 to society per compulsive gambler per year. And that Idaho will have, if we have casinos, an additional 1.5% of our adult population will become compulsive gamblers. At that rate, it will cost our society in Idaho $477 million per year for the social costs, law enforcement costs, treatment costs, whatever that will come with having casinos in our society. We can't afford that. We don't have the money that we now for social programs. We don't have people trained to treat compulsive gamblers. And just one more thing on that. As we sit here right now, there is a conference underway in Minnesota between an Indian tribe and compulsive gambling experts to try to figure out ways to deal with the problems that have arisen in Minnesota from compulsive gambling among the Indians on the Indian reservation. They've got a big problem.
Ms. Matheson.
Well, I think that the state of Idaho is leading, this, and I will say that it's a racist attack on Indian gambling under the moralistic guise of some type of organized crime and all of these horrible ills that we're going to bring into Idaho if this amendment is allowed to pass. We wholeheartedly dispute that. I think yesterday in the Spokesman Review there was an article, and it was some psychologist experts that said that saying that if we bring gambling into Idaho, that Idahoans are going to be addicted is the same thing as saying we should not allow the people in Idaho to drink Coca-Cola because they're going to become addicted to Coca-Cola. I mean, the argument is that absurd. The other argument that I would like to state is that the casinos that operate in Las Vegas certainly by no means provide any type of community services to the state of Nevada. Here, the Coeur d'Alene tribe would be using all of the revenues and proceeds to improve social services programs, to improve the educational systems, and to improve the reservation economy as a whole. We also think that the argument that in the state of Minnesota, you mentioned that there's some problems with gambling. What we are told from talking to the other tribes in Minnesota, and I've seen economic reports, is that the economies have greatly improved as a result of Indian gaming in Minnesota, and that as a result of the gaming, the statistics on Indian reservations have improved. I think everybody knows that The economy on Indian reservations in the United States is not exactly ideal. Unemployment is as high as 50% on our reservation at best. There are social problems and social ills. We want the opportunity to address these issues to improve our quality and standard of life. As we see it, we have no other alternative but to use casino gambling because we can't attract any other type of industry to the reservation.
There's another issue that I want to get into because there's so many, and I'm so frustrated with the lack of time we have, and you both are being very cooperative. But this question is to Ms. Matheson. I have also heard in the debates that have gone on that you've referred to federal law that covers states in relation to this, and the fact that in Idaho that there are other kinds of gambling that are permitted, such as lotteries and parimutuel, horse racing and dog racing and so forth. That one argument I've heard is even if this amendment becomes part of the Constitution, that because that other gambling that is allowed in it, does it create a federal question? Will it go into court? Is there a question of litigation, regardless, or even if this becomes part of the Constitution?
Well, we don't think that if the governor and the Attorney General's office is successful with passing the amendment and changing the Constitution, we don't believe that that completely stops us. We're not really responding to the state law, we're responding to the federal law, the Regulatory Act, and the authority that we have as a sovereign governmental entity. And absolutely we will proceed, and it could result very well in litigation and take several years to go through the courts. But we still believe that we have a strong case. The state of Idaho really should not be trying to stop us. They should be working with us. It would be nice if they could see the benefits that Indian gambling has to the whole economy, reservation economy as a whole. We're looking at creating about 1,900 jobs statewide through all of the efforts of all of the tribes in Idaho. We don't have enough Indians to fill all those jobs.
And Ms. Crow, to give you the opportunity to address the legal question from your perspective.
Well, I don't think the legal question is particularly important because the federal courts are going to decide that no matter what we do. I think the important question is that the social cost of those jobs, if those jobs are indeed produced, amount to about, the social cost to the state of Idaho amount to more than $60,000 for every Native American in Idaho. That's a horrible cost to the rest of society. And this is a remarkable argument that somehow the problems that are associated with casinos are on a par with the problems associated with Coca-Cola. Incredible. That leaves me speechless almost to think that the crime, for example, that's overwhelmed the Colorado towns, that's overwhelmed Deadwood City, South Dakota, that's overwhelmed Atlantic City, which has a crime rate for a city 4 times its size, that's about like drinking Coca-Cola. Those are incredible social problems. They come with casinos, they're inescapable, they will proliferate throughout Idaho. And it's not an attack on Indians to try to protect ourselves from those crimes. Casinos export crime. They export crime to the communities where people go back to and try to rob and steal.
We only got about 20 seconds. Ms. Crow got the first word. Would you like the last word on
Well, I absolutely disagree that the crime rate has risen. We have facts. I have a report right out there from the state of Idaho, Minnesota, that says the crime rates have gone down.
With that, I have to end the program. Thank you both for being so cooperative and discussing an important issue. Ladies and gentlemen, Tuesday is election. We hope all of you will vote and make the choice that you believe is correct on candidates and issues. And until next week, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Telemedia Services on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.